Introduction. The architecture of ultimate control. In the lexicon of modern conspiracy theory, few constructs possess the totalizing ambition, the historical sweep, and the intricate structural complexity of the Committee of 300. Often referred to by its proponents as the Olympians, this theory postulates the existence of a supranational, omnipotent ruling council that functions as the ultimate arbiter of global destiny. Unlike limited conspiracy narratives that seek to explain specific events, such as the assassination of John F. Kennedy or the events of September 11, 2001, the Committee of 300 represents a grand unified theory of conspiracism. It offers a singular, cohesive explanation for the entirety of modern political, economic, and social history, reframing the chaotic evolution of human societies as the deliberate execution of a master plan by a hidden theory, codified in its most influential form by Dr. John Coleman in his 1992 seminal work Conspirators' Hierarchy, The Story of the Committee of 300, alleges that this elite body controls every significant aspect of human activity. From banking and commerce to religion and media, from the flow of petroleum to the traffic of narcotics, the committee is presented as the invisible hand guiding the world toward a specific dystopian future. Proponents argue that the apparent confusion of social and moral values in the Western world, the erosion of national sovereignty, the collapse of manufacturing bases, the rise of counterculture, and the perceived disintegration of traditional family structures, is not the result of organic historical forces. Rather, these phenomena are interpreted as the products of social engineering and mass brainwashing orchestrated by the committee to weaken human resistance to a coming one-world government. This report provides an exhaustive analysis of the Committee of 300. It dissects the theory's origins, tracing its genealogy from early 20th century political rhetoric to its crystallization in the 1990s. It examines the alleged structure and membership of this shadow government, exploring the roles attributed to the black nobility, the British East India Company, and modern think tanks like the Club of Rome and the Tavistock Institute. Furthermore, the report analyzes the strategic objectives attributed to the committee, specifically the 21 goals of the Illuminati, and investigates the sociological and psychological mechanisms that allow such a theory to endure and mutate in the digital age. By synthesizing the claims made in the primary conspiratorial texts with critical historical context, this document aims to provide a definitive anatomy of the Olympian worldview. 2. The authorial persona, Dr. John Coleman, and the whistleblower archetype. To understand the Committee of 300 theory, one must first interrogate the persona of its primary architect, Dr. John Coleman. In the ecosystem of conspiracy literature, the credibility of the message is inextricably linked to the perceived authority of the messenger. Coleman positions himself within the archetype of the disaffected insider, a former agent of the system who has turned against his masters to warn the public. Part 2.1, Intelligence Credentials and the Insider Stance. Coleman identifies himself as a former intelligence officer, specifically citing service with British intelligence and involvement in operations in Angola, West Africa. He claims that his awakening to the conspiracy occurred during his tenure as a political science officer in the field, where he was granted access to top-secret classified documents that were unusually explicit regarding the control exercised by a parallel government over the United Kingdom and the United. Claim of privileged access serves a crucial rhetorical function. It preemptively validates the lack of public evidence for his assertions. By framing his source material as classified intelligence files, Coleman insulates his theory from standard academic verification. The absence of corroborating documents in the public record is interpreted not as a lack of evidence, but as proof of the conspiracy's efficiency in maintaining secrecy. Point 2.2, the narrative of persecution. Coleman reinforces his authority through a narrative of persecution. He describes himself as the target of a carefully crafted and orchestrated program of harassment, financial ruin, and calumny, allegedly run by government agents and informers embedded within patriotic and right-wing groups. He asserts that legitimate opposition to his work is infiltrated by agents who attempt to discredit him or distract the public with lesser conspiracies to hide the ultimate truth of the 300. This framing creates a hermetically sealed belief system. Any attack on the author is evidence of his importance to the enemy, and any rival conspiracy theory is dismissed as a limited hangout or distraction designed by the committee itself. 2.3 Historical ambiguity and identity. The biographical details of Dr. John Coleman remain remarkably opaque outside of his own writings. Born in 1935, he emigrated to the United States in 1969, becoming a naturalized citizen. However, verifiable records of his service in MI6 or his specific academic credentials are scant in open-source intelligence databases. This ambiguity often leads to conflation with other figures, such as John Earl Coleman or John Coleman, the meteorologist and Weather Channel founder. The author of Conspirators' Hierarchy is a distinct entity, one who has built a prolific career publishing monographs and newsletters that act as the primary distribution channels for his theories. 3. Historical genealogy. From the East India Company to the 300. The Committee of 300 is not presented as a modern creation. Coleman constructs a pseudo-historical lineage that roots the conspiracy in the imperial and aristocratic structures of the 18th and 19th centuries. This historical depth is essential to the theory, as it establishes the committee not merely as a political clique, but as a dynastic force with centuries of accumulated wealth and power. 3.1. The British East India Company as the progenitor. A central pillar of Coleman's thesis is that the Committee of 300 is the direct institutional successor to the Council of 300 of the British East India Company. Historically, the BEIC was a joint stock company granted a royal charter in 1600, eventually coming to rule large areas of India with its private armies and exercising administrative conspiratorial continuity. Coleman argues that the BEIC did not truly dissolve in 1874, as historical records state. Instead, he posits that the ruling council went underground, morphing into the Committee of 300 to continue its exploitation of global resources without the oversight of a public aristocratic merchant class. The theory emphasizes the continuity of the families involved in the BEIC. Coleman alleges that the descendants of the 300 merchants who ran the company, families such as the Russells, the Keswicks, and the Astors, remain the core membership of the modern Olympians. The immense power wielded by the BEIC led its directors to view themselves as gods among men. Coleman quotes Lord Bertrand Russell, observing that the BEIC directors felt they could even give God advice. This hubris is said to characterize the modern committee, leading to their moniker, the Olympians. 3.2. The opium trade paradigm. The economic foundation of the Committee of 300, according to Coleman, is the drug trade. He asserts that the massive fortunes of the Eastern liberal establishment and the British aristocracy were built on the China opium trade monopolized by the Dope, Inc. Thesis. The narrative claims that the Opium Wars were not just historical events, but the establishment of a permanent geopolitical drug trafficking. Monopolistic privilege. Coleman argues that the Committee of 300 explicitly chose which families would be allowed to participate in the fabulously lucrative China opium trade. He singles out the Astor family as the first American family allowed into this circle, claiming their wealth is entirely derived from this privilege granted by the committee. Modern continuity. The theory extends this to the present day, alleging that the global drug trade is not run by chaotic cartels, but is a top-down enterprise managed by the committee through British and American banking institutions. The war on drugs is portrayed as a sham designed to eliminate independent competition and secure the committee's monopoly. 3. The black nobility. To provide the committee with a lineage that predates the British Empire, Coleman integrates the concept of the black nobility. Historical definition. Historically, the black nobility referred to the Roman aristocratic families who remained loyal to the Pope after the Italian unification in 1870, wearing black to mourn the loss of the papal redefinition. Coleman redefines the term to refer to the Guelph families of Venice and Genoa, ancient banking dynasties that he claims hold the true financial power of Europe. He asserts that these families are the biological and financial ancestors of the modern Venetian connection. The theory posits that the methods of the Venetian oligarchy, spying, assassination, financial manipulation, and creating orchestrated chaos, were transplanted to England and later the United States. The Committee of 300 is thus the modern incarnation of the Venetian Council of 10, operating on a global scale. 4. Institutional anatomy, the octopus of control. The Committee of 300 is depicted as the executive board of a vast, interlocking network of organizations. Coleman describes a hierarchy where the committee sits at the apex, issuing broad strategic directives, which are then operationalized by a layer of think tanks and roundtables, and finally executed by governments and intelligence agencies. 4.1. The think tanks as branch offices. Coleman identifies dozens of branch offices or front organizations that serve the committee. The most prominent among these are the Club of Rome and the Tavistock Institute. 4.1. The Club of Rome. The architects of deindustrialization, the Club of Rome, founded in 1968, is a real-world think tank best known for its 1972 report, The Limits to Growth, which used computer modeling to warn of the ecological consequences of unrestricted population and economic mimesis. Conspiracy analysis. Coleman views the Club of Rome not as a scientific body, but as the committee's primary weapon for economic warfare against the developed post-industrial agenda. He argues that the concept of limits to growth is a fabrication designed to justify the deliberate dismantling of the industrial base of the United States and Europe. The goal is post-industrial zero growth, a return to a neo-feudal economy where the middle class is eliminated, leaving only rulers and top. Suppression. The Club of Rome is accused of suppressing advanced technologies that could solve resource scarcity because abundant energy would make the population difficult to control. The theory claims the club orchestrates environmental movements to block development, using fake environmental crises to enforce gaps. Study Olof Palme. Coleman cites Olof Palme, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, as a key Club of Rome operative. He alleges Palme was used to manage the phony Iran hostage crisis and transfer technology to the Soviet Union, exemplifying how the committee uses national leaders as pawns in a global game. 4.1.2. The Tavistock Institute, the Engineers of Social Decay. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations is a British nonprofit focusing on social science, organizational behavior, and group conspiracy analysis. In the Olympian worldview, Tavistock is the world center for mass brainwashing. Coleman attributes almost all modern cultural shifts to Tavistock's psychological warfare, Aquarian conspiracy. Coleman asserts that the counterculture of the 1960s, the Aquarian conspiracy, was a manufactured phenomenon designed by Tavistock to destabilize Western society. The goal was to replace the rigid, industrial, Christian values of the past with a pliable, drug-addled, New Age Beatles project. One of the most specific and eccentric claims is that the Beatles were not a spontaneous musical sensation, but a psychological operation created by Tavistock. Coleman alleges that the group was brought to the U.S. to introduce teenagers to drugs and rebellion. He goes so far as to claim that the Frankfurt School philosopher Theodor Adorno wrote the Beatles' lyrics and music as a form of atonal social engineering designed to induce mass hysteria and neurosis. Crisis management. Tavistock is said to design future shocks, series of overwhelming crises that induce a state of passive apathy in the population, making them willing to accept draconian controls in exchange for stability. 4.2. The managers. Bilderberg, CFR, and Trilateral Commission. Beneath the think tanks are the managers of the conspiracy. Coleman dismisses the common view that the Council on Foreign Relations or the Bilderberg Group are the ultimate rulers. In his hierarchy, these groups are merely middle management or discussion groups that receive orders from the Committee of 300 via the RIIA. The transmission belt. The RIIA in London is described as the parent organization of the American CFR. This reinforces the Anglo-centric nature of the theory. American foreign policy is dictated by the British Crown through these overlap. Coleman notes the significant overlap in membership between these groups and the committee, serving as the connective tissue that ensures policy consistency across national borders. 5. The 21 Goals of the Illuminati and the Committee of 300A, defining feature of conspirators. Hierarchy is the explicit enumeration of the 21 goals of the committee. This list has become a catechism for anti-globalist movements, providing a checklist to interpret contemporary political and social following. Table details these goals as outlined by Coleman, along with the alleged mechanisms for their implementation. Goal hash objective mechanism and description 1, one world government. Establish a unified church and monetary system under non-elected, oligarchical rule. 2, destruction of national identity. Erase national boundaries and patriotic pride to facilitate global governance. Promote global citizenship. 3, destruction of religion, specifically target Christianity. Replace traditional faiths with a state-sanctioned one world religion. 4, mass mind control. Use media, education, and chemical means to control public opinion. Create a passive citizenry via technotronic methods. 5, deindustrialization. Implement post-industrial zero growth to destroy the middle class and create a master serf society. Export jobs to slave labor zones. 6, legalization of drugs and pornography. Promote social decay by making drugs and pornography art forms and widely available to degrade moral fiber. 7, depopulation. Reduce the world population through limited wars, famine, and engineered diseases. 8, suppression of science. Halt scientific development except for that which serves the committee. Suppress fusion energy and longevity research for the masses. Economic chaos. Cause deliberate economic crises to destabilize nations, bankrupt independent businesses, and consolidate wealth. 10, weakening the moral fiber. Demoralize the working class through mass unemployment and promote drug-alcohol addiction as a palliative. 11, crisis management. Create crises to make the population confused and apathetic. Prevent people from deciding their own destiny. Cult creation. Introduce new cults and boost existing ones to fragment society. Christian fundamentalism. Build up Christian fundamentalism to misuse it for political ends, then discard it. Fort spread of religious liberation. Export liberation theology and socialist religious movements to destabilize existing religious structures. 5, collapse of world economies. Cause a total collapse of the world's economies to necessitate the reset into the one world currency. 16, control of education. Take control of education in America with the intent and purpose of utterly and completely destroying it. Lower standards and rewrite history. 17, the welfare state. Create a welfare state where the population is dependent on the government for survival, eroding independence. 18, international bodies. Strengthen the UN, IMF, and World Court. Weaken national institutions by transferring their powers to these international bodies. 19, subversion of government. Penetrate and subvert all governments. Destroy them from within by compromising integrity. 20, terrorism. Organize a worldwide terrorist apparatus. Negotiate with terrorists whenever terrorist activities take place. 21, control of education. To ensure the youth are ignorant of history and unable to critical think, facilitating control. Analysis of the goals. These goals reflect a deep-seated anxiety about modernity, conflating actual sociological trends with malicious Malthusian thread. Goals 5 and 7 highlight the centrality of Malthusian thought in Coleman's theory. He argues the committee views the world as a finite pie, necessitating the removal of excess population to preserve the lifestyle of the spiritual war. Goals 3, 13, and 14 frame the conflict as spiritual. The committee is not just secular, it is actively anti-Christian, seeking to establish a Luciferian order. This resonates strongly with the satanic panic narratives of the 1980s and 90s. Membership. Naming the Olympians, a key rhetorical device in conspirators' hierarchy, is the naming of names. Coleman provides lists of individuals and families alleged to be members of the committee. This list functions to ground the abstract conspiracy in concrete reality, mixing recognizable world leaders with obscure aristocratic figures. 6.1. The royal and aristocratic core. The British monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, is frequently cited not merely as a figurehead, but as the active head of the Committee of 300. The theory posits that the crown is the ultimate corporate CEO of the global black nobility. The list includes names representing the black nobility of Europe, such as the House of Orange, the Thurn-on-Taxis family, and the Habsburgs. These names serve to link the modern conspiracy to the Holy Roman Empire and the Venetian oligarchy. 6.2. The American dynasties. Coleman identifies the Eastern liberal establishment as the American branch of the committee, subservient to the British Bush family. George H.W. Bush is singled out as a key operative, allegedly enforcing the committee's will during his presidency, and CIA Astors and Rockefellers. John Jacob Astor is cited for his historical role in the opium trade, while the Rockefellers are framed as the financial managers of the committee's American interests. David Rockefeller is often described as the emperor of the American branch. 6.3. The managers and technocrats, Henry Kissinger, perhaps the most frequently villainized figure in Coleman's work. Kissinger is portrayed as a high-level enforcer who manages the committee's geopolitical strategy, orchestrating wars and assassinations to align nations with the one world order, Olof Palme. As noted, the former Swedish prime minister is identified as a member, highlighting the theory's claim that even socialist leaders are part of the same elite structure. 6.4 Verification and past and present. Coleman's lists often mix living and deceased members. This technique allows him to attribute historical events from the early 20th century to the same continuous body. Verification of these lists is impossible by design, as Coleman claims the information comes from secret intelligence files. Critics note that the list is a compendium of people Coleman dislikes or opposes politically, rather than a plausible organizational chart. 7. The useless eaters. And the modern mutation. The Committee of 300 theory has proven remarkably durable, evolving to fit the anxieties of the digital age. A primary vehicle for this relevance is the concept of useless eaters and depopulation. 7.1 Origins in Nazi terminology. The term useless eaters originated in Nazi Germany to justify the T4 euthanasia program. Coleman appropriates this term, attributing it to the Committee of 300. He claims the committee views the non-elite population, specifically the working class of developed nations, as resource drains that must be culled to manageable levels. The Klaus Schwab COVID-19 attribution. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Committee of 300 theory experienced a viral resurgence. A specific passage from Coleman's 1992 book was widely circulated on social media, but was falsely attributed to Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum and author of The Great Passage. At least 4 billion useless eaters shall be eliminated by the year 2050 by means of limited wars, organized epidemics of fatal rapid-acting diseases, and starvation. Disinformation mechanism. Fact-checkers verified that this text appears on page 105 of Coleman's Conspirators' Hierarchy, not in any work by Schwab. However, the misattribution reveals how the Committee of 300 theory functions as a source code for modern conspiracism. The Great Reset conspiracy theory is effectively a reboot of the Committee of 300 narrative. The villain replaced the Club of Rome with the World Economic Mechanism, replaced post-industrial zero growth with net zero and the Great Reset. The goal remained identical. This fungibility allows the theory to survive even as specific members die off. The roles are simply reassigned to new elites. 8. Critical analysis, fact versus fiction. An objective analysis of the Committee of 300 theory reveals it to be a work of stigmatized knowledge, a complex blend of historical fact, distortion, and fabrication. 8.1 The reality of elite networks. The theory gains traction because it mimics reality. Elite networks do exist. Wealthy families do exert disproportionate influence. Intelligence agencies have engaged in coups and psychological operations. Coleman takes these verifiable facts and stitches them into a maximalist narrative where all disparate events are coordinated by a single room of men. 8.2 Historical distortions. The Rathenau quote, "As established, the very concept of the 300 is based on a deliberate misinterpretation of a 1909 quote by Walther Rathenau, distorted by anti-Semitic propagandists to imply a conspiracy where none was stated, Tavistock and the Beatles. Music historians trace the Beatles' rise to the club scene in Hamburg and the songwriting genius of Lennon and McCartney. Coleman's claim that Theodor Adorno wrote their music is chronologically and stylistically implausible, ignoring the organic evolution of rock and roll in favor of a Manchurian Candidate model of culture. Limits to growth. The Club of Rome's report was a simulation of resource trends, not a policy directive. While it advocated for sustainability, it did not call for the genocide or active deindustrialization described by Coleman. 8.3. The logic of unfalsifiability. The theory is constructed to be unfalsifiable. If the media denies it, it proves the media is controlled. If a member dies naturally, it was an assassination to silence them. If evidence is missing, it proves the secrecy is working. This circular logic makes the theory immune to debunking for its adherents, as every counter-argument is absorbed as further proof of the conspiracy's reach. Point 9. Conclusion. The Committee of 300 is the ultimate expression of the conspiratorial mindset. It provides a totalizing explanation for the anxieties of the 20th and 21st centuries, transforming the complex, impersonal forces of globalization, economic displacement, and cultural change into a personalized narrative of good versus evil. Dr. John Coleman's Conspirators Hierarchy serves as the foundational text for this worldview, weaving together the imperial legacy of the British East India Company, the aristocratic intrigue of the black nobility, and the technocratic fears of the Club of Rome into a single octopus of control. By tracing the lineage of the 300 from the opium dens of Victorian China to the boardrooms of the World Economic Forum, the theory argues that the New World Order is not a future threat, but a centuries-old reality. While structurally flawed and historically distorted, the resilience of the theory lies in its adaptability. As seen in the transfer of the useless eaters narrative to Klaus Schwab, the Committee of 300 provides a flexible template for anti-elitism that transcends generations. It stands as a dark mythology of the modern world, a testament to the human need to find order, however malevolent, in the chaos of history.